Let me pose a question. Do ideological systems really have an inherent property of being effective or ineffective that exists independently from the people interpreting and supporting those systems? It's a tough one, so let's shift gears for a bit to try and address it. Irwin was born in Brooklyn, New York, to a working-class Jewish family. Growing up, he worked a wide variety of part-time jobs until, at 18, he fell in love with a girl named Sheila, and they ran away to California, bringing with them only a couple $100s. They arrived in California with next to nothing, but Irwin got a job at an accounting firm, and over the years, he worked constantly and made more and more money, and today he works at USVP, a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, and lives very comfortably. This is an example of what is known as a rags to riches story, but more often than not, these stories are few and far between. So what is it that made Irwin able to overcome hardship in a way that others often cannot? Irwin, despite having occupied throughout his life an enormous disparity of levels in the workforce, from hot dog seller to CEO, made it clear that he has never felt exploited by any superior. It was his opinion that capitalism isn't inherently good or bad, but that it is within the nature of the people enforcing capitalism. It is whether they are good or bad that determines the success of an individual. He says, the abuse takes place in how the thing is managed, not inherently in the system. This is not unreasonable. Ideologies like communism and capitalism are, to an extent, flexible. Bosses often exploit their workers, and leaders of the Communist Party have often manipulated its ideology for personal gain. But these decisions are human decisions, not systematic ones. In other words, Irwin thought that whether or not exploitation occurs in capitalism is largely up to chance. However, the capitalist system in our country operates on such a large scale that I would argue that random chance doesn't really exist. According to Louis Menand, the top 10% of the population owns 72% of the wealth, while the bottom 50% has only 2%. Menand suggests that capitalism is the cause of this extreme polarity, which seems a much more likely explanation to me than the idea that chance has led to such a drastic reality. Marx himself espoused this view, saying that as society progresses, the bourgeoisie, quote, developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. This makes sense. For society to maintain such an extreme wealth disparity, there must be trends in the capitalistic interactions that merely appear to be governed by chance on an individual level. And this is true. Disadvantaged people are, by birth and by circumstance, more likely to be exploited by superiors, more likely to face discrimination, and therefore more likely to remain disadvantaged. In Benjamin Applebaum's piece highlighting the new face of the American class, there are several examples of this. Guadalupe Guido dreams of becoming a lawyer, but was forced to be satisfied with working at the same carpet warehouse that employed her entire family. Parents strive to create a better life for their kids, but because of what is available to the kids, they are unable to break out from the cycle and end up with the same jobs as their parents. As a Jew in a time of rampant anti-Semitism, Irwin definitely faced discrimination, but his anecdotal evidence against worker exploitation does not contrast these much larger trends. So while the actions of people in power do have some effect on the reception of capitalism, in a country of over 300 million people, these individual actions become collective, and are collectively influenced by forces that are not up to chance, forces like racism, sexism, and classism. In essence, my understanding of Irwin's position is yes, but no. It's actually quite interesting. Irwin, a capitalist who literally works at a venture capital firm, was the son of a radical communist. His father, a member of the Communist Party, saw Irwin's occupational tendencies as a betrayal of the class that he came from. He subscribed to Marx's view that, quote, the proletariat goes through various stages of development. Within its birth, it begins its struggle with the bourgeoisie, end quote. In other words, there were only two classes, the oppressors and the oppressed, and Irwin had crossed from the latter to the former. But Irwin violently disagreed. It was his view that social relations were far too complicated to boil down into just two opposing classes. Yet seemingly contrary to his previous claim that, quote, no system inherently is guilty of any wrongdoing, end quote, Irwin also said that, quote, a capitalist system is the only system that creates wealth which can be redistributed for the benefit of the society, end quote. He also said that communism was a zero-sum game, in which nothing can be created. Interestingly enough, Marx addresses this idea directly, saying, quote, to the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, end quote. Marx would thus argue that Irwin's perception of communism being a zero-sum game is just a reflection of his position in society as a member of the bourgeoisie. But Irwin is also correct that the capitalist system has been much more effective for production than the communist system. So who is right? Do either of these systems have an inherent functional value greater than the other? Or is their effectiveness more a result of historical climate, the people in the government, or the culture of the people on the street? The answer is unclear, but what is clear is that no ideology is flawless, and living under the guise that one ideology will solve all the world's social problems is, frankly, unrealistic.